January of 1881 brought a storm that swallowed Copper Creek whole. Wind roared through the canyon, tumbling down into the little town as if it meant to tear the row of crooked wooden houses from their foundations. Snow fell heavy and blind, smothering the porches, weighing down the steps in thick slabs. Each gust rattled the buildings until their bones groaned, while the lanterns strung along porches swung in wide arcs, threatening to burn themselves out. At the far end of the main street, where frozen mud lay in gray patches, stood the Copper Creek Inn. Its warped walls leaned tiredly, its windows cracked, its paint long since peeled away from the porch beams. Folks in town called it nothing more than a rat's nest for drifters. And in their eyes, the girl who worked there, Eliza Grant, was little more than a shadow. Eliza sat behind the scarred counter, folding coarse blankets thin from use. Her hands were raw from the cold, split at the knuckles from endless washing. She worked quiet, not expecting thanks. The stove in the corner gave off a frail warmth, never enough to chase the chill seeping through the room. Outside, the blizzard howled on, and Eliza knew no soul would risk the road tonight. The inn had filled early, turning away stragglers who disappeared into the snow. She was used to nights like this, used to bowing her head under the gripes of travelers, to bearing the town's dismissive stares, to hearing the whispered name they had given her, colored girl servant. She endured, silent, folding herself small like the shadow in a hallway. Yet beneath it all, a hunger smoldered, the longing to be called by her true name, to be seen as human. That night, as she reached to snuff the lamp on the counter, the door banged open. A blast of wind rushed in, scattering sparks from the stove, tossing the lantern flame near to breaking. Snow rode the air in sharp, stinging swirls. Eliza flinched and clutched the frayed shawl at her shoulders. A man filled the doorway, tall, broad across the shoulders, his coat caked in ice. Meltwater dripped in dark streaks across the floorboards as he stripped off heavy gloves and set them on the counter. His breath came in clouds, ragged from the storm. His eyes, steel gray and steady, locked on hers, not pleading, not fierce, only heavy with the weight of miles behind him. Eliza's heart stuttered. She had seen traders, hunters, wanderers, all worn down by the road. But this man was different. Not only the weariness, but the quiet certainty in his gaze, as though storms were no stranger to him. He pushed back his snow-laden hat, voice rough, trembling faint from the cold. "One night. A room, that's all I need." Her fingers knotted in the hem of her skirt. She knew the truth. Every bed had been claimed, every hallway filled. She drew a breath, steadying her voice. "I'm sorry. There are no rooms left." His eyes closed for the briefest moment, as if to swallow his fatigue. Snow clung, stubborn to his brows, his dark hair plastered to his forehead. His shoulders hung heavy, yet his gaze stayed calm. Eliza waited for him to turn away, like all the latecomers before him. But he did not. Instead, he drew a deeper breath, his tone low and deliberate. "If there is no room, then perhaps I could sleep in yours, just this once." The air thickened. Eliza's pulse pounded in her ears. The plain request froze her still. Since she had left her old home for Copper Creek, no man had ever crossed the threshold of her little room. That sagging cot with its patched quilt was the only thing that was hers. And now, a stranger asked for that place. She stepped back, hands trembling, her voice caught, but honesty forced its way out, small yet clear. I've never shared a bed with anyone. The man did not move. His gray eyes stayed on her, neither mocking nor lowering, only tired and certain. His calloused hand pressed lightly against the counter as he gave a single nod. Then from tonight on, you'll never have to sleep alone again. The words struck heavy, more vow than plea. They were not a jest, not a beggar's trick. They cracked the wall Eliza had built around herself for years. Her heart shook with fear and with something unnamed. The lamplight cast their shadows across the wall. Hers, slight and thin. His, broad and weighed down with snow. Outside, the blizzard raged, but within the inn, the moment held still. Eliza did not answer at once. Her breath came shallow, fingers laced so tight the blood drained from them. She knew a single nod could set her life on a course from which there was no turning back. Yet to deny him might mean hearing by morning that a traveler had frozen in the storm. Silence thickened. Only the crack of firewood and the lash of wind at the door filled the space. Eliza drew a long breath, searching for courage. In her mind rose the taunts she had borne for years. Colored girl servant, easy woman, alone. Each word pricked like a needle. But then, the man's promise echoed again, sure and solemn. You'll never have to sleep alone again. Eliza understood, in that storm-bitten night, that her choice, small as it seemed, would carve a road she could not retrace. The inn door shut behind them, and the storm's cry rose louder, lashing Eliza's cheeks and ears as if bent on knocking her from her feet. She pulled the thin shawl tight around her shoulders and hurried down the snow-caked steps. Copper Creek lay buried in blackness, the streets deserted, every house shuttered tight, their lamplight leaking faint and trembling through the curtains, as though afraid the blizzard might snuff it out. Eliza walked quickly, her wicker basket bumping against her hip with a faint creak. Behind her, boots pressed into the deep snow, heavy and certain. Malcolm followed close, silent, yet she felt him all the same. Solid, steady, his presence a shadow cast across her narrow back. Her cabin was not far, but in the teeth of the storm. Each step stretched long. The wind shrieked in bursts, driving snow against her face and hair, cutting down to the bone. Eliza clenched her hands and pressed on, ignoring the wild rhythm of her pulse. In her head, the whispers of the town pressed close. The glances from the inn that morning, the sneers, the word-colored girl. She knew well what tongues would wag if, come morning, they saw a stranger step from her cabin door. Still, her feet did not falter. Her house stood at the slope's end, huddled beneath a bare old birch. The roof had darkened with age, the window frames crooked, the chimney smoke too thin to promise warmth. Eliza pushed the heavy door open, its hinges complaining. Cold air spilled out to greet them, the stove within holding only a scatter of dull embers. The single room was plain, a sagging wooden bed patched with quilts, a small table with loose-legged chairs, a shelf lined with faded cloth. Bare, yes, but clean, cared for, the only corner of the world that was hers. Eliza moved quickly, kneeling by the stove. Her hands shook as she struck the match. Flame caught, wood crackled, and the orange light threw shadows across the boards. She kept her eyes down, yet she could feel Malcolm watching, gray gaze steady on each of her movements. When she rose, her shawl slipped from her shoulders, falling. Malcolm stooped and lifted it, his rough hand brushing against hers. Eliza started, heart leaping, but his eyes held nothing but calm. No press, no jest. He placed the shawl back in her grasp with slow care, leaving her unsteady. She poured hot water from the old kettle, filling a chipped mug, and set it before him with her face turned away. Her hands trembled, spilling a little onto the table. Malcolm accepted it, drinking in quiet gulps. His breathing slowed, his eyes following her as she busied herself in her small room, awkward in her own space. Time passed under silence. Outside, the storm clawed and battered at the shutters. Inside, the fire snapped, and Eliza's heartbeat filled the stillness. At the bed, her fingers smoothed the patched quilt. The sight was both familiar and strange, hers alone for so long, yet tonight shared. Malcolm hung his heavy coat by the stove to dry. He did not crowd her. He set his gun down on the table, then stretched on the far edge of the bed, leaving a clear space between them. No word, no motion beyond that. Just presence, quiet and unyielding. Eliza lingered, then slipped onto her side of the bed, turning toward the wall. The space between them was wide enough, yet warmth seeped across, unsettling her breath. The room felt smaller, not from cold, but from the nearness of him. She opened her eyes to the dark boards inches away. For years she had lain here alone, her pulse a lonely beat in the silence. But tonight, for the first time, it kept time with another breath, low, steady, so near she could hear it. Clutching the quilt, she felt heat thread through the old cotton. Her chest tightened, her heart thrummed too fast. Her lips moved in the dark, as if words might form, but none came. Each time she shifted, the quilt brushed against Malcolm's arm, making her start and burn hot. She turned away again, holding herself rigid, but their breaths still wove together, in and out, bound by the same air. That night stretched long. Eliza lay awake, eyes open to the dark. Never had she imagined a man lying so near, not to mock, not to take, but to remain, silent and sure. The wind hammered outside, rattling the glass in its frame. But in Eliza's chest, the loudest sound was no longer the storm. It was her heart, beating close to the breath of the man beside her. And in that moment, she knew, after all the years of shadow and silence, she was no longer wholly alone. Dawn came slow in Copper Creek, as though the sun itself hesitated to cut through the heavy gray clouds draped over the mountains. The storm had passed, but the town seethed with something colder than snow. Rumor. No witness was needed. The tale had grown its own wings. In the saloon, the mercantile, even inside the chapel, voices bent close and hissed. The colored servant brought a strange cowboy into her bed. Each whisper twisted sharper, each telling painted the sin darker. Soon the murmurs became open laughter, brittle and cruel. Eliza stepped from her cabin, shawl drawn tight over her head, wicker basket at her side. She meant only to buy flour, salt, and a pair of new lamp wicks, but the instant her boots touched the main street, eyes fell on her like knives. The vegetable seller bent to arrange his turnips, lips quirking in a hidden smile. At the fabric shop, the matron leaned to a friend, whispering before both turned their gaze full of disdain. A cluster of young men outside the saloon raised their voices loud enough to pierce the air. Bet it was warm enough last night, wasn't it? A servant girl keeping her cowboy close. Their laughter rang harsh, as cutting as the east wind. Eliza lowered her head, quickening her step. Each word landed like a stone on still water, rippling pain through her chest. She had grown used to contempt, but this felt different. Now the town had a story, a weapon dressed as entertainment. Her basket trembled in her grip, creaking against her hip. She wished she could vanish, melt into the ground, anything to escape the stares. Then came footsteps behind her, not hurried, not dragging, even, solid, deliberate. She did not turn. She knew. Malcolm walked a few paces back, far enough not to crowd her, close enough that every bystander could see. His broad shoulders carried a heavy coat, dusted white. His boots struck the frozen ground in firm rhythm. He spared no glance at the watchers, gave no answer to their poison. Yet his quiet presence spread wide as a shield. Each time the laughter rose, Eliza felt her back braced by his shadow, as though with him there, no blade of gossip could pierce her. At the flower counter, the shopkeeper, a stout white woman with red cheeks, let her eyes wander over Eliza. Her voice dripped with a sweetness soured by mockery. "Well now, flour isn't the only thing you've been keeping stocked at home, is it?" Eliza flushed scarlet, clutching her basket. Her words stumbled. Just a pound of flour." The woman smirked, slamming the sack down harder than needed. Dust rose, coating Eliza's hands white. Malcolm stepped forward then. He said nothing. Only laid a silver coin flat on the counter, the weight of it ringing louder than words. His gray eyes met the woman's with a level calm, steady as stone. Whatever she saw there stripped the smirk from her face. She dropped her gaze and swallowed her spite. Beside him, Eliza's heart pounded, not from fear of the woman, but from the quiet way Malcolm had placed himself between her and the world. Not with boasts, not with bluster, but with silence firm as iron. When they stepped back into the street, Eliza dared a glance over her shoulder. The crowd still murmured, but no one spoke loud now. The two figures, one tall and broad, one small and slight, cast their shadows long across the frozen ground. In that gray winter light, Eliza understood. What stirred her was not only the vow he had given the night before, but this. When the town's contempt sharpened, he did not leave her to stand alone. He stayed behind her, steady as a wall. And within that hush, for the first time, Eliza heard more than Copper Creek's bitter whispers. She heard her own heart, pounding fast, fearful yet filled with a warmth that had no name. Afternoon settled over Copper Creek with a sharp wind cutting between the eaves, scattering what little snow still clung to the main street. The town wore its usual face, sagging storefronts, a saloon glowing early with lamplight, and clusters of men huddled around barrel fires, their eyes ever eager for the next scrap of gossip to pass by. Eliza Grant stepped out of the inn after a long day's work, wicker basket swaying from her thin arm, a faded shawl across her shoulders. Her brown eyes, so often lowered, fixed ahead today, because at her side walked Malcolm Hayes. He moved with unhurried steadiness, tall frame marked against the narrow street, each boot print pressed deep into the thawing mud and snow. For days the town had fed on rumor. The tale of the colored servant who brought a stranger cowboy to her bed had fastened itself to every meal, every shop corner. But today, with Eliza walking openly beside Malcolm, the whispers sharpened. They showed in glances cut thin as knives, in knowing nods, in whistles dripping mockery. Eliza bit her lip. She had grown used to walking alone, swallowing the weight of disdain. Yet with Malcolm near, the gazes grew heavier, as though his presence itself was a challenge. Her step faltered. At once a firm hand rested lightly against her back, not pressing, only steady, a reminder. She drew breath and kept walking, though her heart raced. At the crossroads, a figure broke from the crowd. Jonas Miller, her fellow hand at the inn, planted himself square in their path. Broad-shouldered, sun-worn face shadowed by drink, his eyes burned red with liquor. He had watched Eliza for years, not with care, but with a hunger edged in anger. And now, seeing her with Malcolm, jealousy flared like fire through dry grass. He glared at Malcolm, then barked a hoarse laugh. "So the talk's true. The colored girl's got herself a cowboy." Eliza stiffened, color draining from her cheeks. Laughter from the men outside the saloon followed quick, harsh as the winter wind. Malcolm's stride slowed, his gray eyes fixed on Jonas, cold and unwavering. But Jonas pressed closer, finger stabbing the air toward Eliza, voice rising. "All these years I worked beside her, splitting scraps from the kitchen, waiting, holding back. And for what? So some drifter could take it all in one night? A woman that easy, what pride can you take in her?" The words dropped heavy as stones. Eliza's face burned. Her fingers clutched the basket until her knuckles whitened. She had heard insults her whole life, but to have them thrown by one who knew her toil cut deeper than she could bear. Malcolm stopped. He shifted, his broad frame shielding her. Silence thickened before his voice came. Low, rough, every word cut clear. "Eliza never wanted you." The street stirred. Eliza's eyes lifted wide. Jonas froze, then forced a bitter laugh, trying to cover his wound. "And who are you to speak for her?" Malcolm did not move, his calm, steel-gray gaze held Jonas fast. His words came slow, deliberate. "She doesn't belong to gossip. She doesn't belong to you. If you've got an ounce of pride left, you'll leave her be." The town hushed. Wind rushed down the row of buildings, the only sound between them. Folks paused where they stood. The seamstress at her upstairs window, men by the saloon fire, all watching. Malcolm's words rang across Copper Creek like a slap, not only to Jonas, but to every sneer that had dogged Eliza. Behind him, Eliza's heart hammered. His back was straight, solid, a shield she had never known. For the first time in her life, someone stood in the open and said she was not a joke, not a trinket to be picked apart. Jonas flushed, fists balled, the sour stench of whiskey thick on his breath as he lurched closer. His voice grated with fury. "You think you're something? You're nothing but a ragged drifter. I've been here. I know Eliza better than you ever will." Malcolm did not yield. His mouth curved faintly, not in humor, but in a blade's cold edge. "You don't know her at all, and you won't speak another word she has to hear." A murmur rolled through the bystanders. Some nodded faint agreement, others smirked, savoring the spectacle. The truth, long unspoken, that Jonas had only ever trailed after Eliza, lay bare now, undeniable. Jonas trembled with rage, yet his jaw locked tight. He staggered back half a step, eyes hot with hate. Before turning, he spat his warning, teeth gritted. "Watch yourself, cowboy. I'll not forget this." His boots struck hard on the frozen street as he stalked off, leaving fresh whispers in his wake. Malcolm bent, lifted his fallen hat, and set it firm on his head. He turned to Eliza then, his touch light at her elbow, guiding her forward. He spoke no word, but his eyes held steady, carrying a promise as plain as any vow. She would not walk alone again. Eliza moved beside him, throat tight. Her face still burned with shame, but deep inside, Warmth stirred, new, steady, and strong. The sight of Malcolm's back, unshaken, shielding her, branded itself on her heart, and she knew this moment would stay with her as long as she drew breaths. That night, Copper Creek lay hushed after a day swollen with rumor. Only the rare flicker of firelight seeped through the slats of shuttered cabins. The streets outside stripped to cold wind and silence. At the end of the road, in her small cabin, Eliza Grant sat close by the hearth, thin hands spread toward the flames, soaking what little warmth they could give. The door pushed open. Malcolm Hayes stepped inside, shoulders frosted, his coat heavy with snowmelt from the well. Eliza rose at once, a cloth in her trembling hands. "Set your coat here, I'll dry it." Malcolm gave a brief nod, stripping off soaked gloves, shrugging free of the weight that had carried him through the storm. Eliza bent to lift it. The heaviness of it felt like the weight of the man himself. She shook it once and something dropped to the floor with a faint metallic clink. Startled, she bent low. By the fire's glow, she saw a velvet pouch, dark and soft, its edge stitched with delicate gold thread. Her eyes widened. In this town of cracked wood and worn tin, such finery had no place. Fingers trembling, she picked it up, the fabric smooth against her work-worn skin. "Eliza." Malcolm's voice broke low, warning, but too late. She loosened the drawstring. From inside slipped a sliver of silk, shimmering even in the meager firelight. It glistened, fine and foreign, unlike any coarse weave she had known. For a moment it felt as though she held something out of her world at all. The room fell still. Eliza raised her gaze, confusion and unease clouding her brown eyes. "What is this? Why do you have it?" Malcolm stood silent, features drawn tight in the fire's glow, gray eyes shadowed. A breath left him heavy. Then he stepped closer, voice slow, even. "You weren't meant to see it, but there's no reason left to hide." She clutched the silk to her chest, as though holding back a secret too rich for her hands. Her heart raced. She had thought him no more than a weary drifter, a man with nothing but dust on his boots. Yet here was proof he carried something beyond the reach of Copper Creek. Malcolm sank into the chair, broad shoulders bowed. His rough hands rested on his knees as his voice came low, rasped with weariness, but clear. "I'm no stray cowboy. I'm a cloth merchant. My home's in Kansas City. I came west searching for flax and new trade, but the caravan was taken. Bandits stripped me of wagons, gold, every bolt of silk I'd staked my life on. I escaped with a handful. What you hold there is all that remains." Eliza stared, each word cutting the air like a blade. In her mind flashed the image of the man who had stumbled into the inn, drenched, near broken, breath ragged, and now, overlapping, the image of a merchant among the stalls of a great city, shaking hands with men of means, laying out silks worth fortunes. She backed into the frail frame of her bed, eyes wide. You were a wealthy merchant?" Malcolm lifted his bust gaze. His eyes locked on hers, steady yet shadowed. "I was. Now all I have are these scraps and these hands." Eliza's fingers dug into her skirt. The room around her shrank beneath the weight of the truth. The patched quilt on her bed, the scarred table, the chipped mug, all of it too poor, too small to measure against the man before her. The cracked mirror in the corner caught her reflection. Tangled curls, dark skin roughened by wash water, hands lined with labor. She saw herself against the silk in her grasp, a contrast so sharp it burned. She turned away, words slipping out tight and hoarse. Why? Why tell me this? Malcolm was quiet a long while. Then he rose, crossing to her slowly. His height cast long shadow across her small frame, yet his voice softened, firm as a vow. Because you're the only one in Copper Creek I trust. You don't trade in lies. You live quiet, looked down on, but you never pretend. That truth means more to me than gold. Eliza's eyes filled, her chest tightening. In all her years, she had known only scorn, easy, unworthy, nothing but a shadow. Never once had someone said her honesty was worth something. Her throat ached with a mix of wonder and grief. The man who had walked into her life through a storm carried not just a secret of silk and stolen wealth. He carried the rarest thing of all. He saw her. She sank onto the edge of her bed, hands clasped tight. Malcolm stood near, the fire painting lines of resolve across his face. And Eliza knew, with a sudden certainty that stole her breath, that her life had already shifted. Nothing would be the same after this night. Night pressed down heavy over Copper Creek, the wind threading through every crack and shutter, carrying a chill that made the whole town curl in on itself. At the far end of the street, in the small wooden cabin, firelight from the hearth was the only glow, casting the shadows of two figures across the walls in restless flicker. Eliza sat close to the stove, her slender hands wrapped around a steaming clay cup. Every so often her gaze drifted toward Malcolm. He sat opposite, his coat still damp from the storm, gray eyes fixed on the flames as if weighed with thought. All day the sting of whispers in the market, the barbed glances of townsfolk, and the secret he had laid bare pressed hard against Eliza. Yet here, with only the two of them and the steady beat of the fire, those cords began to loosen. The silence stretched, filled only with the snap of burning wood. Eliza set her cup down carefully, warmth still lingering in her palms. When she looked up, she caught Malcolm's eyes. They were no longer distant, no longer guarded, but softened, steady, as though he meant to strip away every wall between them. Her heart stumbled. She had spent her life avoiding the eyes of others, but this time she did not turn away. Her breath trembled, her brown eyes holding to his as if finding, at last, a place to rest. Malcolm leaned forward. Without thought, Eliza moved closer too, as though an unseen tether drew them together. Heat bridged the space between, his roughened hand spread across the table, inching toward her. She froze, breath caught, then let her own thin fingers, trembling, rise to meet his. The moment they touched, a shiver ran through her. Her skin was used to cold water, harsh soap, endless work. Never before had a man's hand closed over hers like this, unhurried, gentle, certain. Eliza bowed her head, tears pricking, but Malcolm would not let her vanish into the old habit of hiding. He lifted her chin, guiding her gaze back to his. In his gray eyes, she saw no pity, no contempt. Only one thing: choice. Her chest tightened. A longing rose sharp and sweet, edged with fear. She had been called shadow, servant, nothing, her whole life. Yet tonight, in the quiet weight of his eyes, she knew she was seen. Malcolm bent down. His lips brushed hers, slow, asking, not taking. Eliza trembled, clutching his shirt, then tilted into him with a breathless answer. Their first kiss was clumsy, aching, yet it carried the years of silence and hurt she had borne, now breaking open in one tender moment. Their breaths mingled, drowning out the howl of wind beyond the door. Eliza felt herself fall into a warmth she had never known. When Malcolm drew back, his forehead rested lightly to hers, his voice rough with vow. "I told you, you'll never have to sleep alone again." Her eyes shut, tears slipping free, but they were tears of release. She nodded once, surrendering to the promise. The fire lit the room in uneven glow. Eliza folded into his arms, listening to the thrum of his heartbeat against her ear. His heavy coat was cast aside, the patched quilt pulled over them. The sagging bed, so long a place of loneliness, now held two breaths rising together. Eliza shivered, not from cold, but from giving all she had held back. Her fear, her innocence, her unspoken hunger. Malcolm was patient, gentle. Each touch meant to assure her this was no taking, but a binding. As the night closed around them, her whisper slipped between gasps of breath. "I've never belonged to anyone." His arms tightened, his voice steady as iron, low against her skin. "Then tonight, you belong with me, and from this night on, I belong to you." Outside, the storm gathered again, snow sweeping hard across the wooden eaves. But inside, another fire burned, one no winter wind could ever quench. For the first time in her life, Eliza Grant did not sleep alone. And in Malcolm Hayes's arms, she knew this night was not only the beginning of love, but the beginning of an entirely new life. Copper Creek had not yet cooled from the fire of gossip that flared when Malcolm stood before the town and named Eliza his choice. The old rumor had hardly faded before new ones took its place. "The colored servant has a man to shield her now," they whispered. Some voices carried bitterness, others scorn. A few held wary curiosity. Eliza moved through her work at the inn as always, rag in hand, sheets changed, her back bent beneath words that fell like sleet upon her shoulders. Yet deep inside she was not the same as before. Every time she remembered Malcolm's broad frame standing between her and Jonas on the street, a small flame steadied in her chest. But Copper Creek was no sanctuary for the despised, and that flame was soon tested. That night the sky churned, the wind moaned through the narrow street. Eliza had just laid fresh wood on the hearth when the door opened and Malcolm entered, snow clinging to his shoulders. His face was tight, his gray eyes sharp as flint. "Something's wrong," he said, setting his hat down, voice low and edged. Eliza startled. "What is it?" He sat heavily, his hands clenching. "I've heard talk. A gang's been spotted near Copper Creek. They're after the silk I carried, and someone's led them straight here." The small room thickened with dread. Eliza gripped her skirt, eyes wide. Those shimmering scraps of silk, once a secret between them, had become bait for wolves. Then came the thunder of hooves at the far end of the street, pounding nearer. A shout split the night, harsh and mocking. "Come out, Wade! Hand over the goods and maybe you'll walk away." Eliza froze, her heart slamming in her chest. Malcolm rose and crossed to the window, lifting the thin curtain. By lantern light he saw them. Men wrapped in scarves, guns glinting, storming door to door, ripping houses apart like starved hounds. "They know I'm here," he muttered, jaw hard. Eliza crept close, her eyes drawn unwillingly outside. Among the masked figures, her gaze caught one bare face, and her world pitched. Jonas Miller, no longer the quiet in-hand who scrubbed tables beside her. His lean face, once weathered by work, now shone with smugness. Jonas thrust out his arm, pointing toward her cabin, voice carrying above the storm. "He's here! Hayes is hiding the silk in the colored girl's place. That's where it is!" Eliza's breath seized. The room spun, sound hollowing. Memories of Jonas hauling water with her in silence, lifting a flour sack when she faltered, flickered sharp. She had felt uneasy under his watchful eyes, but she had never imagined this. Her throat closed, pain slicing deep. His silence all those years had not been kinship. It had been possession waiting to claim. And when denied, he had turned to betrayal, selling her out for the promise of coin or favor. Malcolm dropped the curtain, his eyes flashing. He drew Eliza behind him, his voice steady though low. "Don't be afraid. I won't let them touch you." Outside, the gang closed in, their shadows looming tall across the windows. Jonas strode at their front, chin lifted, eyes lit with hate and triumph. "Eliza!" he jeered, voice shrill in the dark. "You think you're better than the rest? You're nothing but a hiding place for a ruined peddler. You're no different from the wares he drags along." The cruelty of it tore deeper than any winter wind. Eliza's vision blurred. Her ears rang. But Malcolm's grip closed firm on her hand, grounding her. The cabin's air pressed heavy, each breath thick with danger. Eliza saw Malcolm, broad and unyielding, the lone wall between her and the storm, clawing at their door. Outside, boots thudded closer, snow scattering beneath them, the click of hammers pulled back on revolvers chilling the night. Eliza understood then. Copper Creek had changed forever. Jonas, the man who once labored at her side, had unmasked himself, and the knife of his treachery cut deeper than all the town's jeers combined. She swallowed hard, bitterness and clarity burning together. The whispers, the scorn, none of it mattered compared to this. The wound of betrayal by one who had stood nearest. And as the gang's voices rose outside, as the shutters rattled with the press of danger, Eliza knew Copper Creek would not sleep easy again. Boots thundered outside the door, shaking the small cabin with each pounding step. Malcolm stood firm at the front, hand braced on his revolver, gray eyes lit sharp in the flicker of firelight. Eliza pressed close behind him, her heart racing wild, her hands icy cold, but in her gaze burned a strength she had never known before. The door burst open. The gang surged in, faces covered, eyes fever-bright in the dark. Guns and knives flashed, their howls splitting the night like wolves on the hunt. Jonas followed them in, his face twisted with pride, his voice shrill as he pointed. "Seize him! The silk's inside! Don't let him escape!" Malcolm's gun barked, deafening in the small space. One outlaw fell screaming, his body striking the floorboards with a heavy thud. But there were too many. They poured in like floodwater, pressing Malcolm back toward the scarred wooden table. Eliza stumbled to the far corner, her hand brushing the oil lamp on the shelf. Its flame trembled in the draft, casting her face in stark light. Memory rushed over her. Every sneer, every whisper, every year of being dismissed as nothing but the colored servant. Her whole life she had been a shadow. But tonight, amid the chaos, a thought rose fierce inside her. She would not be silent anymore. She snatched up the lamp, hands trembling but eyes steady. Jonas stepped forward, shouting, "Eliza, give me the silk, now!" She fixed him with a gaze aflame, brown eyes bright with a fire even she had never felt. Without a word, she hurled the lamp to the ground at the gang's feet. Glass shattered, oil sprayed, flames roared up at once, wild and red, racing across the floorboards like a beast unchained. In an instant, the little cabin was a furnace. The outlaws screamed, stumbling over one another, their coats and scarves catching fire. Some clawed their way toward the door, others writhed on the ground. Malcolm's revolver cracked 3 more times, dropping the desperate who lunged his way. Jonas reeled back, his face bleached pale in the inferno's light. He shrieked, voice cracking, "You're mad! You'll burn us all alive!" But Eliza no longer shook. She stood straight, her slight frame cut sharp against the flames, no longer hiding from anyone's eyes. She met Jonas's gaze with calm, cold finality. "I chose this, and I'll never be silent again." The gang broke, tumbling into the street in panic, coughing and cursing, their cries scattering into the night. The blaze lit half the town, sparks leaping high into the dark sky. Townsfolk rushed from their homes, staring wide-eyed as the raiders fled. In the chaos, Jonas lunged with a knife, his face twisted in rage. But Malcolm was faster. He swung, fired. The gun's roar split the fire's crackle. The blade clattered to the floor, Jonas crumpling with a cry. Neighbors surged in with shouts, brandishing pitchforks, clubs, anything at hand. They fell on Jonas, binding him as he kicked and cursed. "You fools!" he spat, struggling against the ropes. "I only wanted her for myself. Everything I did, it was for—" His words choked as the knot tightened. Dragged down into the crowd, his wild eyes darted, then vanished beneath the press of angry men. Malcolm turned at once, striding through the heat and smoke. He seized Eliza's hand, pulling her from the burning house just as the rafters groaned and split. They stumbled into the street, breath ragged, the fire behind them consuming her small home. Eliza stopped, staring back. The cabin that had held her silence, her shame, her years of endurance, was now a tower of flame collapsing into ash. Yet her eyes did not weep. She had struck the spark herself, and in that blaze her old life was buried. The townsfolk ringed around, their faces washed in the glow. No longer were their stares steeped in contempt. Some whispered low, some said nothing. But none could deny what they had seen. Eliza Grant, the girl they had mocked, had set fire to the dark and driven out the wolves. Malcolm's grip tightened at her side. His eyes searched hers, stern yet tender. "You did what even I never thought you could." Eliza lifted her chin, the fire mirrored in her brown eyes. For the first time, she understood a truth as fierce as the blaze behind her. The power to change had always been in her own trembling hands. The flames devoured the cabin, but within her, another fire burned brighter still, the fire of choice, of courage, of a woman who would never again be hidden in shadow. Dawn crept slowly over Copper Creek, dragging pale light across the scarred horizon. Pink-gray clouds hung like an open wound that had yet to close. The town woke to the smell of smoke still clinging to the air, ash drifting down from what remained of Eliza's cabin. The small wooden house, once her only refuge, was now a heap of glowing embers catching the first rays of day. Along the road, townsfolk gathered in knots, murmuring low. Faces that had once turned away from her now fixed their eyes on Eliza. The looks were no longer pure contempt. Mingled with curiosity, there was a thread of cautious respect, as if each person tried to understand how a woman they had dismissed had lit the fire that drove a gang of men into retreat. Eliza stood within the circle, fingers tightening on the hem of her smoke-stained skirt. Soot streaked her cheeks, her eyes shadowed from sleeplessness. Inside her chest, her heart still trembled. Yet beneath the tremor, she felt something new, an unmistakable shift. Her whole life she had moved like a shadow, head bowed clearing tables, hands red from washing rags, swallowing the sting of gossip as though it were just another draft through the door. But last night, her own hands had hurled the lamp. Her own hands had set the blaze that broke the siege. And when the gang fled, she knew she was no longer invisible. A cough sounded behind her. Malcolm stepped forward, his tall frame rising above the crowd. He laid a rough hand over hers, a light squeeze that felt like an anchor. Eliza lifted her gaze to meet his gray eyes, steady, unspoken, promising nothing trite yet carrying a silent vow. "I'm not leaving." Her throat closed. After years of living in fear of being left, this moment caught her breath. She could not see the future clearly, but his presence beside her steadied her legs. The crowd still whispered. A man who had often mocked her now folded his arms and muttered, "That girl, she did what no one dared." A shopkeeper bent to her neighbor and murmured, "If not for her, Copper Creek would have burned last night." The words drifted to Eliza, strange and weighty. She had never sought their recognition. Yet now, as their eyes fixed on her, another fear crept in, the fear that this respect would prove fleeting, that by tomorrow they would return to the same old rumor. Malcolm seemed to sense it. He stepped forward, drawing her gently out of the ring, guiding her toward the well at the edge of town where mist still curled. No one stopped them. They only watched in silence, as if understanding that something had changed forever in the night. By the well, Eliza sank onto the stone rim, her small shoulders slumping. The water mirrored her face, tired yet strangely resolute. Her voice rasped, "I've lost my home. There's nothing left, Malcolm." He knelt in front of her, his steady hand closing around hers. He did not give speeches. Only his eyes, deep and sure, poured away the emptiness yawning inside her. "You still have yourself," he said quietly, "and you have me." Tears welled and spilled hot from Eliza's eyes, burning away old wounds. In Malcolm's arms, she no longer felt small. Instead, a quiet peace settled over her, even with the storm still waiting beyond the town. From far off, the church bell tolled, marking the start of a new day. Copper Creek stirred again, yet it was not the same town as yesterday. People passed by. Instead of turning their heads, they nodded to Eliza. Small gestures, but enough for her to see. From now on, every glance would be different. Eliza gripped Malcolm's hand and whispered to herself, "I'm not a shadow anymore." And in that dawn light, among ash and mist, she knew she had crossed a threshold. The road ahead would still be rough, but with his hand in hers, for the first time she believed it would not be a lonely one. That morning, Copper Creek was more crowded than usual. The whole town seemed to gather in the narrow square where stalls pressed shoulder to shoulder. Shouts of barter rose with the clatter of hooves. The smell of fresh bread mingled with hay and horse sweat. After the night the gang had been driven off, the town had not stopped talking, and Eliza Grant's name burned on every tongue. She walked through the press of bodies, Malcolm's warm hand clasped firmly around hers. Eyes turned from every side, curious, doubtful, envious. She had lived her whole life looking down, slipping past such gazes. But today, with Malcolm at her side, there was no turning away. A voice cut above the din. "There! That colored servant! The one who lit the fire last night!" An old woman clicked her tongue. "Not just luck, no. That girl's got more nerve than half the men here." The words sliced and mended in the same breath. Eliza felt her hand tremble, but Malcolm's grip tightened, steadying her. Then, without warning, he halted at the market's center. The noise faltered as he turned, squaring himself to the crowd. His tall frame, sun-darkened face, and iron-gray eyes marked him like a post driven deep in the earth, and still his hand held hers, as if nothing on earth could pry it away. His voice rang out, rough but clear, cutting clean through the murmurs. "She is not your jest. She is not for you to sneer at. She is the woman I have chosen." The square fell still. Not a breath seemed to stir. Every eye fixed on them. Eliza froze, her chest clenching. The words landed heavy, yet they lit something fierce within her. The woman I have chosen. No one had ever spoken such words about her. Malcolm gave her hand a tug, pulling her forward so that she no longer stood behind him, but beside. Eliza saw the faces then. Those who had laughed, those who had whispered, now struck silent, their eyes startled. Fear surged, old and familiar, urging her to bow, to hide again. But Malcolm's gray eyes beside her told her the time for that was past. She drew a breath and lifted her chin. For the first time, she did not look at the dirt, did not tuck herself behind her shawl. Her brown eyes met the gaze of the town full on. No more silence, no more hiding. Wind shifted through the stalls, tugging at her worn skirt. Yet in the morning light, she felt herself stand taller than she ever had before. The murmurs started again. Some shook their heads, others frowned, but not all. Here and there a nod passed quietly, as though a new picture was being drawn before them. "If Hayes says it so," a man muttered, "then there's reason behind it." A woman holding her child close whispered, "She's not the same as before." Eliza heard it all. The words no longer cut like poisoned knives. They fit together like pieces of a new story, one that did not erase her, but built her again in front of their eyes. For the first time, she did not feel swallowed whole. Malcolm bent close, his whisper warm at her ear. "Do you see? There's no need to run. You deserve to be seen." Hot tears welled in her eyes, spilling freely down her cheeks. She did not hide them. Let the town see, for they were not tears of weakness, but the mark of a beginning. From the church tower, the bell tolled, its peal rolling over the square, solemn and sure. In the midst of the crowd, before all of Copper Creek, Eliza stood side by side with Malcolm, her head held high. And she knew from this day forward, her name would not belong to whispers and shadows. It would belong to truth. She had faced the town, and she was no longer invisible. The sun sank behind the distant ridge, casting a crimson glow across Copper Creek. A long day had passed since Malcolm's public declaration in the marketplace. Word had spread swift as wildfire, and the town had not ceased talking. Yet this time the whispers carried less scorn. Folks spoke Eliza Grant's name with a mix of curiosity and a touch of respect they had never given before. In the rented house of an old acquaintance, Eliza sat by the window, hands clasped in her lap, eyes lost down the main street. Memories crowded close. The little cabin now reduced to ash, the long nights she had faced alone, the cruel gossip that once gnawed at her spirit. And then the image of Malcolm returned, his hand clasping hers before the market crowd, his rough voice declaring her place at his side. The door creaked open. Malcolm stepped in, his weathered face calm beneath the weight of the day. He set his hat upon the table and crossed to her. "Eliza," he said, slow and steady, "I've made my decision." She looked up, brown eyes unsettled. "About what?" He sat beside her, gray gaze holding fast to hers. "I won't leave Copper Creek. Instead of drifting on, I'll open a cloth shop here. And," his hand closed firm around hers, "you'll be the one to stand with me." Eliza went still. Her heart clenched, then broke loose in a rush that stole her breath. A shop. A beginning. A roof that meant permanence. A promise he would not vanish as so many others had before. You want me at your side?" Her voice shook as though the words themselves might betray her. Malcolm nodded, certainty in his eyes. "Not just want. I need you. This town will see you as the woman who walks even with me, not the shadow they once despised." Tears welled and slid free. Eliza covered her mouth with trembling fingers. "That night, I told you, I've never shared a bed with anyone." A faint smile touched his mouth. He brushed a calloused hand against her damp cheek, leaned close, his voice low as a vow. "And I told you, from now on, you'll never sleep alone again. Eliza, this will be our home." The words broke her open. She sobbed, not with fear or shame, but with release, with the sudden weight of a door swinging wide. She pressed her face to his chest, hearing the steady thrum of his heart, and for the first time believed there was a place in this world where she truly belonged. Outside, the sky burned with dusk. The church bell tolled, long and low, and children's laughter rang somewhere down the street. All of Copper Creek seemed to bear witness. This town, once ruled by rumor, would now be the ground where Eliza and Malcolm raised a home of their own. At last, the long winter loosened its grip on Copper Creek. Ice melted into glittering rivulets beneath the new sun. Streams trickled along the rutted paths, and tender shoots of grass pushed through the stubborn earth. The town hummed with a lighter rhythm, as though the air itself had shed its heaviness. On the main street, a new wooden sign swung modest yet proud. Hayes and Grant, dry goods of cloth and silk. Inside, the room shone bright with fresh whitewashed walls, shelves lined with bolts of linen, and a few gleaming folds of silk displayed under glass. Townsfolk stepped in, first surprised, then murmuring admiration. No one sneered. No one whistled mockingly. Instead came careful questions, measured bargaining, and eyes, half uncertain, half respectful, turned toward Eliza Grant behind the counter. No one called her the colored servant any longer. When they reached for fabric, they spoke her name clear and plain, Miss Grant. Two simple words, yet for Eliza, they carried the weight of rebirth. A name once buried under scorn, now spoken as recognition that she was, at last, seen. Her smile came easily as she handed cloth across the counter. Her hands no longer trembled. From her patched dress to the way she lifted her head, everything in her bore the quiet stamp of change. And each time she glimpsed Malcolm's frame in the doorway, broad shoulders in a sun-worn coat, gray eyes steady as bedrock, her heart whispered in silence, "I belong here." That evening, Spring winds drifted soft from the mountains, carrying the scent of thawed soil. The shop was shuttered, townsfolk gone home. Malcolm led Eliza onto the new wooden porch built along the shop's side, the place they now lived, a true dwelling. They sat on the steps, watching the sunset pour crimson fire across the sky. Below, Copper Creek's street still bore traces of shadow, while beyond, the peaks lay crowned with snow, a reminder that winter could always return. Yet together, they felt a warmth that no storm could strip away. Eliza leaned her head against his shoulder. She remembered the words she had once stammered out on that first stormy night. "I've never shared a bed with anyone." Back then, it had been a confession, raw with shame. Now, thinking of it, she gave a trembling smile through tears. Malcolm tightened his hand around hers, his calloused palm enveloping her slight fingers. He bent close, his voice rough but tender in her ear. "I promised you'd never sleep alone again. This is our home now." The tears fell freely, not the bitter tears of humiliation, but tears clear as spring water, tears of release, of faith renewed. She pressed her face into his chest, listening to his heartbeat, steady and strong, and for the first time she believed this corner of the earth was hers to keep. Outside, the prairie wind sighed its reminder that storms might come again. But the storm inside her heart had ended, for she no longer faced it alone. Copper Creek would go on whispering. Doubt would linger. Some would still shake their heads. Yet Eliza no longer carried that burden. She understood now. Happiness did not live in praise or wealth, nor in the gaze of others. Happiness was found when one soul stood beside you, willing to call your name in the open daylight. And here, beneath the scent of new-cut timber, hand in hand with Malcolm Hayes, Eliza knew she had found it. They sat in silence, letting the quiet carve itself deep within. Over ground that once drank her tears, they had raised a roof. If this story stirred something in you, memories, lessons, or simply a quiet warmth, share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd be honored to hear them. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell so we can keep walking together through the pages of the Old West, where love still finds a way to bloom against the storm.